The story of Alexander the Great in detail. What is happening? Everyone, it's me, and this is the story of Alexander. Now, despite what the Disney movie might have you believe, Alexander the Great was not born in 356 BC. He was actually born in Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedon, in 356 BCE. His dad was King Philip II of Macedon. His mom was Olympias, the daughter of Neoptolemus I of Epirus. Basically, Alexander had royal blood from both sides, and by all accounts, his parents weren't exactly the model couple. They had a pretty tumultuous relationship that even resulted in Philip kicking Olympias and baby Alexander out of the palace. But Philip would meet his demise 3 years later at the hand of one of his own generals, leaving Olympias and her son to return to the palace and take back power. While Alexander was just a kid during this whole ordeal, historians do claim that he witnessed his father's murder, which obviously traumatized him. It's also said that Olympias raised Alexander to hate Philip's murderer, Antipater, who ended up becoming regent to the young Alexander. So, needless to say, there were some hard feelings in the family. But back to Alexander. When he was 13 years old, his mother sent him to be tutored by the philosopher Aristotle at his academy in Athens. And so for 3 years, Alexander learned everything from literature to science to philosophy from the master himself. He was a sponge, soaking up knowledge and quickly rising to the top of his class. In fact, when he turned 16, his mom even commissioned a statue of him as the god Zeus to commemorate his status as the brightest student at the school. It should come as no surprise that Alexander went on to become one of history's greatest military minds with such a distinguished education. But before we get into that, now back to the video. Upon his return to Pella, Alexander began training for his future role as king, learning about agriculture, hunting, and military tactics. At 20, he officially became the military commander of the kingdom and began his reign with a campaign against the Cimmerians and the Tribalians, 2 nomadic groups located north of Greece. Now, these people had been causing a lot of trouble for Macedon, regularly attacking their northern borders, so it was up to Alexander to put an end to that. What followed was a series of brilliant military maneuvers, including the Battle of the River Stiber, where Alexander led a small force of heavy infantry across a river in the dead of night to attack the unsuspecting enemy camp. As a result, the Cimmerians and the Tribalians lost 10,000 men, and the rest fled north. Needless to say, the northern borders of Macedon were safe once again. But Alexander wasn't done just yet. Not by a long shot. After crushing a rebellion in central Greece, he turned his sights on the Persian Empire, beginning his campaign in Asia Minor with a march through Thrace. At the time, the Achaemenid Empire, otherwise known as the First Persian Empire, stretched from central Greece all the way to the Indus River, encompassing an area of roughly 2.4 million square miles. By comparison, the United States, the third largest empire in history, only encompassed around 3.5 million square miles at its greatest extent. So the Persian Empire was massive, but it was also extremely diverse, housing many different cultures, ethnicities, and religions. Despite this, the Persian kings managed to keep their colossal empire together for over 200 years, but they did rely on their many vassal states to help maintain order. Unfortunately for them, one of those vassal states was Macedon. After conquering most of Greece, Philip II of Macedon made it his mission to bring Persia into submission, marching as far east as the Halys River. However, he would meet his demise before completing his conquest, leading his son Alexander to take over the campaign. Alexander's first order of business was to settle the border disputes in Greece, subjugating the unruly states of Thebes and Corinth and restoring peace to the region. Then, in 336 BCE, at the age of just 20, he became the king of Macedon. With the Greek city-states under his control, he set his sights on revenge against the Persians for invading Greece back in 480 BC and defeating his idol, King Leonidas of Sparta. To accomplish this, he assembled a war council consisting of some of the greatest military minds in Greece, including Parmenion, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antipater. Together, they formulated a plan to invade the Persian Empire through the northwest route. This way, Alexander could bypass the vast majority of Persia's army and take the fight straight to their king. In 334 BC, Alexander's forces crossed the Hellespont, otherwise known as the Dardanelles, marking the official start of his invasion of Asia Minor. Upon arriving, he wasted no time sending messengers to the local Persian governors demanding that they surrender. But the Persians were led by the mighty King Darius III, who refused to back down, and so Alexander began his campaign in earnest. His first target was the city of Sardis, the capital of Lydia, which surrendered after a siege of 3 months. From there, he headed south to besiege the city of Halicarnassus, otherwise known as Bodrum today. This one was much more difficult, lasting a full year. But eventually the Persian governor, Mavstus, surrendered the city and joined Alexander's ranks. Moving on, Alexander liberated the Greek cities of Miletus, Byzantium, and more, all while dodging the massive Persian army led by King Darius. Finally, in 333 BC, the two armies met at the Battle of Issus, and after a day of fierce fighting, the Macedonian army emerged victorious, pushing Darius and his forces all the way back to the mountains of Armenia. With the major Persian cities in his control, Alexander spent the next 2 years consolidating his power, suppressing rebellions, and installing his friends in positions of authority. Meanwhile, his enemies in Greece, the Spartans, launched a surprise attack on the northern border of their territory. Luckily for Alexander, it was easily repelled, and the Spartans were forced to sue for peace. But Alexander didn't feel like waiting any longer. He wanted to finish what his father started, the conquest of the Persian Empire. And so in 331 BC, he marched his army east, once again aiming to catch Darius off guard. The following year, Alexander finally caught up to Darius' army, and the two clashed once more at the Battle of Gaugamela, near modern-day Erbil, Iraq. This was by far the largest battle of the entire war, with estimates ranging from 200,000 to 700,000 total combatants. The outcome, however, was never in doubt. After a furious cavalry charge from Alexander himself, Darius's forces broke and ran, losing over 100,000 men in the process. As for King Darius, he barely escaped with his life, eventually dying a few months later of either exhaustion or a wound sustained in battle. Regardless, the real casualties of the war, however, were the civilians. Many cities were left in ruins and countless lives were lost. Following the battle, Alexander advanced south, capturing the Persian capital of Babylon and finishing what his father started, conquering the Persian Empire. Over the next few years, he continued his relentless campaign throughout Egypt, Syria, Central Asia, and northwestern India. Along the way, he founded over 70 cities, including the famous city of Alexandria in Egypt. He also made many friends among the locals, most notably the Indian king Porus, who he befriended after defeating him in battle. Of course, he didn't make friends with everyone, including the notoriously stubborn King Porus, who he executed after a failed assassination attempt. Throughout his campaigns, Alexander continued to expand his army, which ultimately grew to around 150,000 strong, making it the largest military force of its time. Yet, somehow, he was able to maintain good relations with the Greeks and the Persians, keeping his multicultural empire mostly at peace. His success as a ruler was largely due to his intelligence, leadership skills, and adaptability. He was well-educated, charismatic, and highly skilled as a military strategist. But perhaps his greatest strength was his ability to adapt. You see, Alexander was not a demigod, despite what the Disney movie might lead you to believe. He was a product of his environment, taking on the cultural traits of the places he visited. For example, he adopted the local customs of the Persians, including their dress and their traditions. And when he visited India, he even converted to Buddhism for a short time. This open-mindedness made him very popular among the people he ruled, many of whom saw him as a liberator rather than a conqueror. Sadly, Alexander's reign came to an end on June 10, 323 BC, when he died of malaria, or perhaps poisoning at the age of 32. Some historians even claim that his death was the result of a long-term alcohol abuse problem. According to Plutarch, Alexander drank 3 cups of wine every day. Regardless of the cause, Alexander's empire didn't last long after his death. It quickly broke apart, splitting into several smaller kingdoms ruled by his former generals known as the Diadochi. While this marked the end of Alexander the Great's reign, his legacy lived on. Over the centuries, people would look back at Alexander as one of history's greatest military minds and one of the most influential leaders of all time. And though many empires would rise and fall, Alexander's empire would serve as the inspiration for many more, including the empires of the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Mauryas, and the Kushans. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this quick overview of Alexander's life. If you want to learn more about him, I've got the perfect book recommendation for you, The Death of a King by Robin Lane Fox. I'll link it below. And if you want to learn more about ancient history, check out my other videos. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.